Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Chats with Kat on Voice of Adoptees podcast. I am your host, Kat, and I hope you are all having a wonderful week so far. Don't forget to grab your coffee or tea or a preferred beverage and settle on in. I'm currently here with Kira, who is an actor, martial artist, and an adoptee advocate. So, Kira, welcome. It's great to have you. So, briefly introduce yourself to those who are listening.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Kira Omens, and I am a transracial international adoptee from Zhongshan, China. And I grew up in the DC area, and now I live in Los Angeles. And I am a full time audiobook narrator, and I'm an actor, martial artist, and an adoptee activist.
Oh, I didn't know you were an audiobook narrator. That sounds fun.
Yeah, that's what I do full time.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh my gosh. There's so many different directions we can take this. I'm excited. So, well, let's start at the basics. Let's talk about your adoption story. Tell us about it.
So I was born, like I said, in Zhongshan, China. I was found by the side of a bridge when I was 4 months old and brought to an orphanage. And then I was adopted by white parents, brought to the United States. I have a younger brother who is adopted from Korea and a younger sister who is my parents' biological child. And I went to a predominantly white private Catholic elementary and middle school growing up, which I think very much affected my relationship with my culture and with my adoption story. I just very much wanted to be normal, just like all the other kids, and have nothing weird or different about me. And being in a multiracial family was something that was obviously very different, not the norm in that community. So when I left that environment and went into high school, which was a more diverse environment, I think that's really when I started to come into myself, come into my identity as a Chinese American woman. And it wasn't really until college that I started to embrace the adoptee side of my identity. I entered the Pacific Miss Asian American pageant and won that with the platform of intercultural understanding. And because of that, that really launched my advocacy in the adoptee community. And I was just introduced to so many wonderful people who were sharing their stories. And it was just, I haven't looked back. I have been immersed in the community ever since. And obviously, my views on adoption have grown and changed as I have learned and grown. But that's about it.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. So, okay, going back. You were saying that you're from a multiracial family, right? And you were talking about just your experience in school, where kids are mean. And I'm curious to know how you dealt with that, how you kind of navigated through that at such a young age, how it made you feel. Obviously, you've learned lessons from it. You've grown into a stronger person, a more confident person. But I want to take it back to the moments where you felt different from everybody else.
Absolutely. I did not deal with it very well. I didn't really deal with it at all, honestly, in a productive way. I think that my parents did their best. I think that as far as adoptive parents at that time period, they did a really wonderful job and did what they could with the resources that they had. That being said, I think that the way in which we discussed those kinds of feelings in my family was not as well informed as some of the resources that we have today. I think that from a very young age, my parents tried to instill in me that our differences make us special, our differences are a good thing. That's not something that a 12-year-old girl actually believes when surrounded with all of these beautiful blonde girls who all wear the same thing and like all the same things and all of that stuff, and feeling on the outside of that and not having many friends. And it was just a very lonely experience. I don't think that people really I didn't have a lot of people who understood what I was going through. And my brother, who was also adopted, who we have since talked about our experiences now as adults, but at the time we were both children, and I don't think had the language really to articulate what we were going through, how we were feeling. And he has a lot of other layers to his identity that also affected his experience. Whereas for me, I just did not have anyone who I could truly confide in, anyone who truly understood what I was going through or knew my experience. So it's a very isolating and ostracizing feeling. And I think that that's something that a lot of adoptees experience, transracial, domestic, or otherwise, because it's such a unique experience. And I truly feel that unless you also have the lived experience of being an adoptee, it's not something that you can truly understand, regardless of how empathetic you are. And I think that even as you get older, like those feelings of loneliness and isolation and ostracization don't necessarily go away. And so I think that as a child, I just did not deal with that very well. I don't think I, again, did not have the language to express what I was feeling. And so just kind of kept to myself. I was the kind of kid who never spoke in class. Honestly, if anyone from my elementary or middle school found out that what I was doing today, I don't think they would believe you. I don't think that they would be like, that girl talks for a living because I would not. And so it wasn't really until high school where I even started to find my voice and started to be even remotely comfortable in who I was.
I think you worded it really, really well there. Just the overall experience of adoptees going through life, especially when they're younger. It's interesting to me that you pointed out about how in high school you came into your own, because that's how it was more for me as well. Even though I felt very lost throughout high school, I feel I came into my own more than I had when I was much younger. Just because I felt lost, I was the only adopted child. I was the only person from Russia. So it was kind of, you want to fit in, you don't know how to, you're not necessarily accepted sort of deal. So going through, so you've moved from, the younger years into high school, you've come into yourself. How did the part of you from high school, how did you look back on yourself when you were younger and see the difference? I'm sure that when you did that, you were able to be like, this is me now, this is me then, kind of like what you're doing right now with me.
Yeah, yes. So I think that I didn't see the difference quite as starkly in high school. I think in high school, once I started making friends and I was like, oh, people like me, I joined theater and found such a wonderful community of people and friends and mentors within my high school theater department. And that's really where I feel like confidence was instilled in me. And I really started to embrace who I was and love myself a little bit more. And I think that in high school, I was just so caught up in trying to fulfill those early childhood wounds of not really having friends and not really being like well liked, or at the time it was so important that like boys liked me and all those things. And so I think that in high school it was just such a rapid journey of me trying to fulfill all of those needs that I had when I was younger that just weren't there. And I mean, I even still feel it now. Just I'm sure people can relate, just like glimpses of your younger self. Sometimes like my mind will just flash back to what that was like. And I'm like, oh, part of me is still like a very like awkward, that like very shy, closed off person. And sometimes those moments will come back to me. I'll see glimpses of them if I'm like in a social situation and suddenly feeling out of place, and just for a brief moment will just forget all of the progress that I've made, how far I've come, and just be that like little kid again. And so that part never really goes away. But I think that in high school I was just very like one track minded, like now that I have this confidence, let's just run with this and like forget all of that other stuff ever existed.
No, I love that. Okay, so when obviously in high school, you mentioned that you were in theater and theater drama really helped bring you confidence. What made you consider theater to begin with? Was it just something that you had enjoyed overall, like during your younger years? Was there a certain allure, appeal to it? Or did you just say, I'm going to do it, I'm going to take a chance, and here I am, sort of thing? Because I feel from what I've kind of researched, I correlate where you are now in your life and what you do now would probably stem back to that decision to go into theater. Maybe I'm looking into it a little too much, but for me, I definitely see a correlation there. So I want to know more about this.
100%. You're 100% right. You're not looking into it too much at all there. That's exactly the correlation. I just really liked to write when I was in middle school and took a theater class because I thought that that was an outlet towards writing my own work, directing, all of that stuff. But the theater classes are primarily acting classes, and
Right.
so I started acting and then just fell in love with it. I had such a wonderful teacher who is still a wonderful mentor to me today, and he just helped me come out of my shell. Like I said, I very much credit him with instilling confidence in me and helping me have stage presence, and is like the reason that I do what I do today 100%. And so it was very much just like writing behind the scenes stuff. And then when I had to take an acting class, and just the leadership and the other kids in the class were all so nice and supportive of each other. I feel really fortunate that I had that environment because that's really where I fell in love with performance, and that's why I do what I do.
Oh yeah, I love that. I totally understand the theater thing because that's how it was for me as well. I have a similar situation to you, and then
Yeah.
when I went to theater, I felt what it was is I felt safe, and I also like to write. So I everything you're saying, I totally resonate with. It's also the fact that do you think that maybe I don't know if it is this way for you, but with acting, not necessarily writing, because we'll get into that a little later, but with acting, you kind of had to become a different character. So do you feel that by becoming different characters, it helped you find yourself more?
That's such a good question. That's
Right.
such a good way to put that.
Yeah, because I was thinking about it and I'm like, I feel like this is what helped me. So I'm wondering if you had that same experience.
I think so. I think that I didn't have the strongest sense of self when I was in high school. I think that throughout my high school years, I got better and better about knowing who I am and finding myself in that way. But you're right that when you're performing, you have like a home base, so to say, of where you start out. And then you adjust those things based on what character you're playing in the simplest of terms. But that is what you do. And so I can see how that would really help you say, well, like, okay, well, my voice sounds like this now. A different character might have a different sounding voice. Same with your physicality, same with your behavior. And when analyzing a script, same with your motivations behind certain choices. You might see a choice that a character makes and think, I would never in a million years do that. But because that's what the character does, you have to figure out why you would do that. And
Right.
so I think you're right that that really helps you come and learn more about yourself.
Right, and I think it's for me, I think it's very interesting relating that to adoption because many people who are adopted don't necessarily know themselves, know where they belong, know where they fit in. For me, as a writer, as a script writer, looking at different characters and trying to put myself in their shoes and thinking about, okay, so this guy is a certain sort of way. He looks like this, he talks like this. And it's just like you said, like you kind of want to figure out what made them that way. Why are they that way specifically? And that's how I look at people. And I feel you as an advocate, as an adoptee advocate, you also look at people that way where each adoptee is not just they're not just a person, but they're a person with a story.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. That's such a beautiful way to put that.
Right. Oh, thank you. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about high school and your younger years. Now let's move on. I heard you said that you were in a pageant and you won. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, it was my one and only pageant. I never did another one.
Oh!
I was scouted at a dance performance that I did.
Wow.
I was enrolled in Chinese folk dance classes since I was 4 years old, so from a very young age, and it's primarily the way I've kept in touch with my Chinese heritage. And the PR manager for the Pacific Miss Asian American pageant saw me dancing and came up to me afterwards and very much recruited me. And my dance teacher had been wanting me to do that pageant anyway, but I'm like, I don't know, that's not really my thing. That's fine. But I was able to go to the pageant the year before I entered, and see all of the contestants. And before, my idea of pageants was just, oh my goodness, all these like girls that get all glammed up and they're all so like ditzy or whatever. And like, I just had a very superficial understanding of pageants. And watching all those girls, I was so floored and impressed by how smart and gorgeous and accomplished and talented and all of these wonderful things that I wanted to be as a woman, just they exhibited all of these wonderful qualities. And I was like, oh my goodness, it would be such an honor to stand on that stage and meet other women like that and be surrounded by other women who are doing things that are so inspirational to me. So that's why I ended up entering. And then I won, and it was surreal. It was so stressful. That's why I never did one and will never do one ever again.
Oh,
I have so much admiration and respect for people who do them. It is not easy. To this day, it is probably still one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And it was a wonderful experience though. I got a lot out of it, and I think that that was when I really came into my own, and that was just, for obvious reasons, a very big confidence boost for
of
me.
course.
And so I think that I was able to take that and try to use that to do better for my community.
Okay, so let's talk about that right there, where you came into yourself. You feel, if we look at it, it's like a full circle, right? You're going around. Now it's like the circle is closed and it's glowing because you're coming into yourself and you feel confident in who you are. And it's like, I can do this. Now, after you won the pageant, you had a platform and you've chosen to
Mhm.
use your platform for a few different things. Let's talk about that. I know, again, you are a advocate for adoption, but when you won, what were some of the things that you were doing after that? Like, what began your journey into advocating?
Yeah, so I was very much launched into the adoptee community. I
Okay.
don't think I was truly prepared for the sheer number of people that would hear what I had to say. And I will say that at the time, I didn't know very much. I was just learning about my own adoptee identity. I didn't know much about what the community needed, but that's what I really wanted to learn, is because I have a platform, because people were listening to what I had to say, how can I use what I have to help people who are like me and people who don't have a platform and whose stories need to be told to a wider audience. And so when I first started out, I very much was like an advocate for adoption. And now I like to say that I am an advocate for adoptees specifically within the adoption system, just because
Mhm.
I don't advocate for adoption in every sense. But I think that that was really the start of me trying to learn more about just the adoptee identity and what that means to so
Mhm.
many different people.
Right. Okay. So,
Oh,
what
and
was one of
then
the more memorable experiences from after you won? You're now launched into this, and you're going to be talking to the entire adoptee community. What is one of the more memorable experiences?
so shortly after I won, I met Rosemary Lauer, who is the founder of the nonprofit Devotion to Children, which is devoted to helping single mothers who are under the poverty line, to give them financial support to be able to raise their children. And I that was really the first time that I thought about that cause in terms of adoption, and how there isn't a lot of support for single mothers, and how that can very easily, especially in marginalized communities, lead to children being put up for adoption. And I think that that was a really big eye opener for me. And again, I was very young. I think I was 19 or 20 at this time. And so at that time, that was a really huge eye opener for me in into the adoptee community, and just the larger things at play that feed into the system. And so I think that that was really the first step into me trying to understand adoption as a whole outside of my own individual experience, which I feel like even now looking back on it, I just didn't know a fraction of the things that I know now. But another experience that I had shortly after I won was I was on a panel, an adoptee panel that was speaking about microaggressions.
Wow.
And I just learned so many wonderful things from my fellow panelists. And it really forced me to reflect on my own life experiences and think, yes, I've experienced a lot of microaggressions. Actually, when I take the time to think about it,
Hmm.
I really have. And it's not something that I ever consciously thought about or had a conversation about. And so all of these were just such wonderful eye openers for me to learn.
Can we talk about that for a moment about
Yes,
microaggressions within the adoptee community? I would love for you to just elaborate on what you learned, what you've spoken about, and so we can also bring some of that awareness here to the podcast to those who are listening.
absolutely. So I will say, full disclosure, I spoke on that panel 8 years ago,
That's
but
okay. That's
I
okay.
think that there is definitely, it's still a conversation to be had.
Hmm.
Just some of the questions that people will ask adoptees, that the questions that people feel comfortable prying into about people's lives. Like, people have been asked, how much did they cost? You
Mm,
know, I have been asked about my real parent, like, in quote, real parents all the time.
right.
And that's so subjective. It real is such a subjective term. And some people may feel that their adoptive parents are their real parents. Some people may feel they're biological. It's just, it should be up to the adoptee. People outside of our lived experiences should not be assigning to us what is real and not real. And so that is just a term that I think should be avoided. It should be up to the adoptee to be able to say what they believe is real or not. And so terms like that, and then just intrusive questions. I'm sure that you have also experienced,
Yeah.
just as soon as someone learns that you're adopted, all of a sudden they think they have a right to your history and your story. And it's not, no one owes that to anyone. It's a
Right.
very personal, it's a very personal experience. And especially when I talk a lot about how I have a really wonderful relationship with my adoptive family. And even so, not everything is perfect. I still struggled with a lot of issues growing up, and I still struggle with a lot of issues today related to my adoption.
Hmm.
But can you imagine that for someone who has a perfect adoption on paper, that not everything is still right? Can you imagine if, like, anyone who had less than a perfect story, all of the things that they'll be facing? So, long-winded way of answering your question, but yeah,
No,
there are a lot of questions that people ask and feel entitled to information about.
100%. Like for me, it's very interesting. This is why I really enjoy hosting this segment because I like to talk about, your adoption story, getting to know the person, but these are the sort of things where it's like I want to talk about because I want to also bring awareness to other adoptees, to those who are listening. Our audience is so broad and we're grateful for everyone who listens. But and I don't know how to word it where it's just, again, like my experience, I'm adopted from Russia. So the type of microaggressions I've received and as of other adoptees that I know who are adopted from Russia could be different than some, you because you're adopted from China, right? So sometimes people like to get more personal, but more about like the country specifically. So, for example, a question I could think of immediately that would be for like a Chinese adoptee would be something about the one child policy. And in Russia, it would be something about like communism or, I feel like when people do microaggressions, they don't necessarily, sometimes they don't mean to, but other times it's kind of like they take what you've been through and they turn it into almost a joke. That's
Mhm.
just my experience with it. So for me, I just knowing that you were on a whole panel, I didn't even know that existed. I had no idea. So for me, I'm very happy because my goal in creating this whole segment is to make sure anyone listening who is adopted knows that they're not alone. We all have thought, felt, experienced either similar things, the exact same thing. And, we can all get through this if we bond together. As adoptees and for those who are adoptive parents who listen, it's important to make sure that they are aware of how their children could feel so that they can also help them go through the experiences more. And it's important for the parents to be aware that people can definitely pass on these microaggressions to their family members, their children, whomever is adopted. Maybe it's just not spoken about, but it is a very big part of adoption. Unfortunately, adoptive conversations, I guess, is more like it. So for me, I'm very like happy and like not relieved, but almost relieved to hear that there's such a more broad conversation going on about adoption. Um, it makes me happy because a long time ago, it wasn't necessarily that way. Again, we don't talk about age, but back in the day, it wasn't like that. It was more hush hush sort of thing. And now it's just so much more in the open, and I am personally just very happy about that.
I
And you,
completely agree. I
well,
think
you being
that
an advocate, you're helping that, you're bringing that to light. So I want to also really talk about your advocacy work and what it is specifically that you're doing now.
yeah, absolutely, I'd love to. So, very recently, as in just last week, I
Mhm.
had finished a fundraiser for Adoptees for Justice with a very good friend of mine. She's an artist, and were she made this beautiful print that she was selling, and all the proceeds are being donated to Adoptees for Justice, which, if you for those of you who are unfamiliar with the organization, it is a it is a group that advocates for an Adoptee Citizenship Act that includes citizenship for all adoptees and closes a loophole in the Child Citizenship Act. And Adoptees for Justice also helps adoptees who are at risk for deportation, who have been deported, who need legal assistance, and a lot of basic need items as well. So I've partnered with them for a couple of collaborations to speak on their behalf and to advocate for an Adoptee Citizenship Act, which, if you didn't know, it passed the House of Representatives last year, but failed on the Senate floor. So
Mhm.
it has to be reintroduced. But this organization is doing such an amazing job. It's always a bipartisan bill. Last year, I believe it received 20, or not 20, 70 co-sponsors. Big difference there. And so that is one of the most recent projects I've been doing. I also recently wrote a testimony for Voices Against Illegal Adoption. They presented a paper at the UN either last month, or it was this year, but that was also very recent, and wrote a testimony that was advocating for increased protections for people who are victims of illicit adoption practices, specifically internationally, but I also spoke a little bit domestically. But that is also something that I've been working on. And in general, my primary goal is to increase adoption education. I've also worked a lot because I'm in the entertainment industry, niche of mine is to speak about the portrayal of adoptees in film and television,
Yeah.
and how orphans are very much used as a plot device, and how that can inform our personal and societal ideals surrounding adoption. So that's also something that I speak about.
Everything that you just said, I absolutely love because I it's funny. That's something that other people just no one talks about it. So I was one of the children that could have been deported. And so it's interesting that you're saying this because I tell everybody, I'm like, no, I had to get my citizenship. I had to go and take a test and go through all of the legal hurdles and everything like that. And everyone's like, you sound American. You don't sound like you're Russian or whatever. But I'm like, I literally have my citizenship certificate right here with me. I have to bring it with me because I'm scared that if I go somewhere, they're going to try to deport me back. Right. And it was a very real thing. I remember we got something in the mail where the government was saying like I could be deported. So we had to continue to go through this, and people just don't know the legal potential ramifications of that. People think that just because they adopt a child, the child is fine. The parents are American, so the child should be okay. But it wasn't for me, it wasn't that way, and I was adopted younger. So it was a it's a very interesting experience. Again, I don't hear people talking about this, so I'm glad that you are bringing this to light, and once again, I'm very shocked because I from all the other adoptees that I've actually spoken to, I haven't heard anyone talk about this experience. I
It's a
actually
very
feel
real
like I'm
issue
the
facing
only
the
one
community.
who has had this experience.
No, you're not alone. It is a very
Yeah.
real issue facing our community, and for
Yeah.
anyone who's interested, adopteesforjustice.org has a lot of testimonies and firsthand accounts of stories like yours
Yeah.
of people who were unable to obtain citizenship, adoptees who have been deported, and it is a very real problem, and especially being adopted at a young age like
Mhm.
you were not brought to the United States by choice. It was not a conscious decision on your part, and it is a failure of the system that children are not automatically naturalized.
Right.
And I know that the Child Citizenship Act attempted to fix that problem, but it's not fixed. It's not fixed. There are a lot of adoptees who are still subject to deportation today, and it is an issue facing our community that people don't realize. And that's why I feel that this issue needs to be talked about more. Again, whenever it's brought into the House, whenever a new bill is proposed for an Adoptee Citizenship Act, it is always a bipartisan bill because it's unjust. It's unlawful that you would be subject to deportation
Right.
for choices that are beyond your control, and now you have to suffer the consequences as an adult. And it's not fair. And I think that this organization is doing a lot of wonderful work. There are a lot of people who are just really pushing and that I have so much respect for. And I hope that more people look into it because I think that the more eyes on it, the more people who care about it, the more our representatives will care, and the more motivated they will be to get that bill passed.
Oh, definitely. I definitely will be looking into that. I will be going to the website after we speak. Because for me, that just the whole experience of having to go through that is trauma in and out of itself. And just not knowing if you're going to pass, if you're going to get your citizenship, if you can stay is it's a very scary thing. I didn't get my citizenship. I wasn't allowed to get my citizenship until I passed all these tests and all, and it was horrible, but I got it in high school.
Wow.
Right. Like, I mean, I'm past high school. I'm out of high school. I'm out of college. But I got it in high school. And I mean, everyone, and it's funny, I'll never forget when I came late, we had to drive all the way to like the main state court basically to be sworn in, go in front of the judge, be sworn in, raise your hand, and then you get the certificate and there's like a whole little thing that happens. And I was very late to school and everyone in school was making fun of me because I was late. And I'm like, well, I just became a citizen. And then they started making fun of me because I wasn't a citizen. I was,
Mm.
and it's a lot of children don't necessarily know who are adopted. I mean, they don't know that they don't understand that they're not a citizen. They don't, I didn't know I was on a green card or I had an alien card. I had no idea until that letter came and my dad was like, yeah, we have to do this. So for parents out there, I think it's a very, very good idea to go through that process to get ahead of the curve. And maybe you don't need it, but just in case, because you never know. Plus, it will give your child the peace of mind as well. Because
Absolutely.
yeah, I did not have peace of mind getting getting the letter in the mail saying that I could be potentially deported. That was not fun.
No, and all of those tests to be doing that when you're in high school on top
Right.
of all of the other life things you are having to worry about, let alone having to worry about not being deported, that's
Right.
incredibly stressful and should not be happening. And I mean, I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that like, I don't know, when I look at the US citizenship test as someone who's lived in this country for however many years, I am just like, I don't know if I could pass this,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, I'm already here. And so just for you to have that extra pressure of like, I need to pass these tests so I can get my citizenship for a country that I was brought to when I was very, very young, not of my own
Hmm.
volition, it's it's unjust. That's so stressful.
It was very it was very stressful. I was going to ask you what issue you felt was the most important to advocate for adoptees. For me, I feel like you just said it. However, if there is another issue that you also feel that is important that you do advocate for, please feel free to take the floor and to talk about it.
So that's absolutely the major one, but
Mhm.
I think that in a much broader sense, just to inspire people to listen to more adoptee voices and more adoptee stories, and to expand your education of adoption
Right.
outside of the dominant narratives that exist. Just that adoption is a purely positive experience of a child who didn't have a family and got a family, and to expand that to the duality of a child who also lost a family before
Mhm.
they joined a different one, and how all adoptions begin with loss. And there is a lot of grief that comes with that. And it's not something that a lot of people realize. It's something that a lot of adoptee advocates have been saying and will continue to say. And it feels repetitive to harp on it, but
Mhm.
it is something that I wish more people knew and understood.
Right.
And there's a lot of duality to being an adoptee, and it's a very complex life experience. And the way that people can help, a very accessible way people can help, in addition to all of the calling your representatives about the Adoptee Citizenship Act, all of those wonderful things as well, as opposed, like, outside of adoption reform, one way that people can just really help is to listen to adoptee voices and uplift those stories, especially marginalized voices within our community,
Right.
like yourself with Adoptees Without Citizenship and that story, adoptees with disabilities,
Mhm.
adoptees in the LGBTQ plus community. There are a
Mhm.
lot of other marginalized voices outside of the advocates that you will hear from. But in general, just learning more about adoptee stories will go a long way.
I agree. And with that, I want to shift focus to you now in the present, with you working on film, being an actor, also kind of being behind the scenes and writing. How does your adoption experience impact all of that? And what projects are you working on?
So now that the strike is over,
Yes.
I'm able to
Oh,
talk about some of the projects that I've been working on.
okay.
I worked on a feature film in January that is going to come out next year. We just
Ooh,
released the poster for it, and next month we will release the teaser trailer for it. So that's very exciting. But to answer your question about how adoption plays into all of that, I think that especially recently, with the release of a lot of media with adoptee protagonists
mhm.
like Joyride and Blue Bayou and Return to Seoul and Instant Family as well, which is more adoptive parent central, but has adoptee characters in it that are major characters as well. But with that, and then also with recent current events like Michael Oher's lawsuit in regards to The Blind Side,
Yes.
it's a very adoptees in entertainment is a very relevant topic right now. And the way in which we are portrayed in TV and film is very important, because unless someone has a very close person in their life that they're able to speak to deeply about this experience, their understanding of adoption is going to be informed by what they see in media,
Yes.
because TV and film is how you get into a character's mind, you have empathy for that character, you go with them on their journey. That is going to inform a lot of people's ideals about adoption. And
Right.
so it's an important conversation because of all of those implications. And so I think that more recently, my adoptee identity and my identity as someone in the entertainment industry have been not, I shouldn't say clashing, but just coinciding more than they used to.
Right.
And so I think that that's really important to me. I actually recently, I guess about a year ago, turned down a role because it was a sequel to a film that I had been in before, and I read the script, and they had given my character an adoptee backstory that I really did not endorse,
Okay.
and felt that was not it was not given the proper care and respect that it needed to, and so turned down that role. And so it is kind of a balancing act of I want to be successful in my career path, but I want to stay true to my values and continue to be respected within my own community
Right.
and not have adoptees be exploited for emotional pull for a plot line in a story. So I think that it is definitely a balancing act.
Oh, I agree. And so, with you being an adoptee in the film and entertainment industry, doing just various tasks, how do you feel your heritage comes into play? You know, your just your ancestry, your heritage, your basically like your descent. I'm really curious because I was briefly looking on your Instagram and I saw a few posts about uplifting Asian women in film, and I want to know more about that. I want to know more about that advocacy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have before I like I mentioned, when I was in high school, I noticed that there was a lack of Asian American people in general in film and TV, and we've come a long way since then. We still have a long way to go,
Mm-hmm.
but with the release of movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once, Crazy Rich Asians, Always Be My Maybe, like all of these wonderful films with Asian American leads, that is such an important conversation. And I feel that now that that conversation is being highlighted, that that kind of diversity is proven to be successful in the box office, now I think that we can expand that conversation to adoptees as well and that representation. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that it's just very interesting the way that I feel my identities are, like I said, kind of coinciding, and the intersectionality of it that gives me the thoughts and opinions on it that I do. But I am obviously so for Asian American women being leads in TV and film, Asian Americans in general. I think we still have such a long way to go in terms of equality in the film industry. But because I have feelings on Asian Americans leading film and TV, when that is like, I think the Joyride is a very clear example of this, where I am so for Asian American women leading,
Mm-hmm.
but because of its portrayal of adoptees,
Right.
there was a lot of conflict in my mind where I'm like, I want to support this wholeheartedly, but because of this plot line that I feel could have been handled differently and with a little more respect to the adoptee community, there's internal conflict there. And so I think that that just plays into what I mentioned about the duality of being an adoptee. There are so many things that are that can that like we can appreciate about our experiences, but there are also a lot of things that we can wish can be different, and all of those feelings can exist at once.
So for adoptees in entertainment, the entertainment industry, media, script writing, all of it, how do you feel that the entertainment industry can promote adoptees and do right by them? What is your opinion of it since you're in that entertainment industry as an actor and working behind the scenes and everything like that? Also, your amazing work with advocating. So what do you recommend?
Thank you. I My hope is just that storytellers will do their research to to consult with the adoptee community
Mm,
so that they can tell the most truthful and honest story. And I think that that's only going to make stories better because there are nuances to our identity that you just won't understand if you haven't lived that experience. It's like with This Is Us, they consulted, I believe, Angela Tucker,
mm,
and I think that the community pretty widely believes that that's a very nuanced portrayal of an adoptee character. And it's because they did their research and it's because they spoke to someone who lived that experience. And I think that the more that storytellers can do that, not
mhm,
just in regards to adoptee stories, but in regards to any identity. If you're writing a gay character, if you're writing an immigrant character, if you're like, regardless of the identity of the character you're writing, the more that you can pay respect to the community that you will be representing, the better your story is going to be. And that's my hope for everyone in the entertainment industry, is just that we pay respect to the communities in which we're portraying on screen.
So something I mean, I agree with everything you just said, but something I also really like to say here is that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you for who you were, the journey you took to get to who you are today. And I'm proud of who you are now and the journey you're on to get to that person that you're trying to become. And, it's not easy. Life in general is not easy. And in ways it can be harder because of our adoption struggles. And I just want to make sure that you also acknowledge that for yourself and you take that in as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I feel the same way about you.
Of course. And with this is Gigi. She says hello.
Oh,
Gigi,
hi.
would you like to close us out, Gigi? With this, thank you all for joining us on this episode of Chats with Kat. A special thank you to our guest, Kira. Stay tuned for another episode every other Wednesday on the Voice of Adoptees podcast. And always remember, someone somewhere is thinking of you. You are not alone.